This next couple of videos is about these speaker enclosures. Now the speakers are self-contained and just set on the floor, but the customer wanted to cover them just so they'd look a little bit better, right? And I came up with the idea of a couple of end tables in case the speakers go away later in life, he would still have a couple of tables. Anyway, let me show you how I made these. Thanks for watching. Starting on these speaker enclosures, so I've got this drawn full scale. This is the front. So the speaker would go here. The sides have these curved panels, and there's a place for a hidden drawer, and of course the top. So to start, I'm going to be making these curved panels. So the front and the back side of each panel is going to have solid wood, and then this will be a substrate that's curved. So to start, I found some Riftsawn Oak, and I wanted to find something that had a beautiful sweeping grain. And I've shown this before, different YouTube video. It's just a window with that pattern, just something close for now, like I did here. And with that, I can trace that, cut it close to the bandsaw, and then sand it. Rather than making one as a template, I just make the first one out of a leg and leave it a little bit long. And by doing that, let me pull these guys off. This has been glued and anchored, screwed. I don't spend a lot of time with some of these jigs, just a scrap piece of particle board and a 2x4. And so with that, I was able to trace this leg right onto this particle board, right? And looks beautiful right there. That's nice and flush. And so what I can do, now that I have this anchored, I can put another stop here or here. And so when I cut all 8 of these, they'll all be the same. I like using these that have a built-in magnet, right? But if you're using something that doesn't have a magnet and it doesn't tend to hold, it won't hold a screw. This one's holding because what I do is I take a couple of magnets or a large magnet, whatever, and charge it. Then it'll hold your screw. What I wanted to show you are these dudes. So these are by a guy by the name of Raymond Woods, Clamps Plus. And basically you just take these guys, you know how you have to have wrenches to adjust those, or if you're lazy, a pair of pliers. You just take these guys, throw these in the trash. Replace them with one of these. And he has these in different lengths. I think he has plastic knobs. I got these aluminum ones. I think they're a little bit better. And that is fantastic, right? So on the fly adjustment, no tools necessary. Let's get that guy up there. Something like this will go in here. That's fantastic, right? Yeah, man. Check this out. This is end grain veneer. This is going to help me create that illusion of the tenon going all the way through the top. And you can imagine how crumbly this would be. But it has some sort of a mesh backer, and that holds it all together. And then the top or the front has some kind of a coating, but it didn't seem to affect anything after I sanded and finished it. The veneer I'm using for this project I ordered from Certainly Wood. It's 1/16 of an inch thick. And the easiest way for me to cut that is with a modified crosscut sled at the table saw, even across the grain. And here you can see that blue sanding block that's clamped in place. I use that to create the overall length, and then the other block will slip in place as a spacer, and I can make the widths all the same. Now this veneer sled is absolutely incredible. If you don't have a sliding table saw, this is a good alternative. You can see more at my YouTube video called Perfect Veneer Seams. All of these references will have links in the description. So I'm probably like the rest of you and really dislike sawdust, right? So yesterday I was using my veneer sled. You can see this sled rides on this straight edge that's attached. There's a kerf there. Veneers go down. Sacrificial board holds that down. The blade is protruding just slightly past that top veneer. Clamp it down, make the cut. But what was happening is all that sawdust was exiting right through that kerf, right on me, even though my dust collection is pretty good. So I made this simple box and created this hole, an exact size that I needed with the shaper origin. And now with that, boom. Perfect. So this was a size that I didn't have a hole saw for, but with the shaper origin, it was exact to the thousandth of an inch. Man, I gotta tell you, I love this machine, not just for jigs and holes like this, but for actual work that I'm doing. I have something spectacular to show you soon. Stay tuned for that. I thought this would be worthy of noting in this video since we're working with veneer. Now, you can see how dramatically different one side is to the other, or one edge is to the other. It's really dark there, light here. When I flip it over, it's relatively consistent. Interesting, right? So if I'm doing a book match and these are sequentially cut out of the flitch and I flip one over to do a book match, boom, whoa, what's going on, right? So I want to do a test. This is some fall off one of the edges, right? Dark on this side, light on the other. Same situation when I go to book match one of these and flip one over, it's pretty different. So I'm going to glue those together, then we'll sand that and see how it looks. Now the reason these look different is because the way they are sliced at the mill, and oftentimes something called light refraction, not reflection, but refraction, will cause that every other piece in a starburst pattern, for instance, to look different. But as you can see here, it's not going to be a problem. At this stage, all the solid wood for the panel ends are milled flat, parallel. They're wild on the side that's going to get the subtle curve cut, right? But they're just wild. They're wild in length. And what I'm going to do now is I'm going to add some Wenge veneer down here at the bottom, which will make this foot or sock when the speaker enclosures are done. So to start, I'm going to put one in my vise here. And I'm just going to route a recess, a 1/16 of an inch thick, or the thickness of this Wenge veneer, right? So I just made a simple jig. You can see this was actually used for something else before. And this guy will go in place somewhere in there. And since this is wild, the lengths of these are wild, this could be wild somewhat for now. And then later, I can determine from this transition between the Wenge and the oak exactly the length of that Wenge and then the length of the leg. But for now, I just leave everything wild. It just makes everything easier. So we'll clamp this guy.
Nothing too tricky. Let's put one here just because it's easy and I don't want it to move. Yeah, that feels pretty good. All right.
Router has a 1-inch collar and a 3/4 inch bit. This 3/4 inch bit has been sharpened a few times, so I know it'll fit in there. Incidentally, these collars, typically they come about a 1/2 inch long, but I like using 1/4 inch material because a lot of times it's just easier to cut and shape, especially if it's a curve, rather than cutting something real thick. Just make a 1/4 inch thick material. And I grind all my collars down so that I can use them on thinner material. Just a little side note there. So anyway, we're going to take this, we're going to bring the router bit till it makes contact with the work. Right there. We'll release the lever so that stays in place. We want to plunge down. This is about a 1/16, and it's whatever it is, doesn't really matter, right? So we bring this, put it in place. Boom. That's going to go down a 1/16 of an inch or whatever that veneer thickness is. Now, I want it to be slightly proud of that. piece of tape, a couple of layers. 4 layers is 1/64. That easy. All right, let me plug this dude in. We'll give this a go. Something like that. And that veneer will marry to that. It'll be a nice transition. That's just slightly proud. I can glue these on, then cut this curve close with the bandsaw, and then put it in the jig that I showed you earlier, and make that nice smooth cut. Check out that plate to set my router. Handy. And then here at the chop saw with an overused sacrificial fence, I can cut all those pieces. I realize there is a lot of debate over types of glues, specifically Titebond products. Here I'm just using a Titebond 2 because I like the color. It dries dark. But typically when I'm working with veneer, I like a Unibond 1 or a Unibond 800. These are rigid glues and glue creep is not an issue. But these are small enough pieces, won't be a problem. And these clamping cowls are made of plastic. They're either polystyrene, polyethylene, polypropylene, something like that. But they are amazing. They will never stick. I can put them right against the glue. Now, what does tend to stick is tape, especially after it's been immersed in glue and then clamped. But a heat gun will soften that adhesive and allow you to pull it up, usually in one piece. Just don't overdo it. The adhesive can separate from the paper. This is a tip I absolutely love, thought I would share. I always add longer cords to my tools. I dislike extension cords, and this particular cord is off a vacuum cleaner. Just make sure you match the amps from the original cord or go a little bit heavier, as I did here by purchasing some, what they call around here, SO cable. All right, back to the veneer, and yeah, the veneer sled will allow you to cut perfect glue-ready seams right off a table saw. And I actually prefer the blue tape, the regular standard original tape, but I was running low. And here's that simple jig or fixture in action. Nothing too tricky. You've probably seen this a bunch. And that's a Big Daddy bit with a bearing at the bottom. It'll follow the template, creating a nice smooth cut, cutting the wenge and the oak at the same time for a perfect transition. And now I can take these to the router table using a rabbiting bit with a bearing, and utilizing a couple of passes to make that curved rabbit, and then over to the table saw to make the straight rabbit. Oh, and incidentally, I thought I'd show my version of a push block. It's a simple scrap of plywood. It's double-sided, and the way it's designed, not only do you push from the back corner, it also holds the workpiece down firmly against the table saw or router. 101 ways to do things, yeah. Beautiful. There's all the end caps. At this point, they're all shaped perfectly, and they are wild in length. Although I did inadvertently cut a rabbit on the wrong face. I'll have to fix that. All right, great progress. So at this stage, I've got all my plywood cut that will make up the panels. And of course, one side is straight. We've got a 1/2-inch rabbit, 1/2-inch plywood. It's a little undersized. That leaves me just the right amount. You can see the grain orientation is going this direction because our veneer will be going vertical to match the vertical grain on the end caps, right? So that's all pretty straightforward. Now on this curve, I've got 8 pieces of 1/4 inch, so 4 for each one. And you'll notice that the grain orientation on this is going vertical. And on this other piece, it's going horizontal. Those two will get glued together. And the 2 of these in thickness will make up this 3/8 rabbit. So it's 3/8, and plywood is a little undersized, so I couldn't really use 1/4 and 1/8 inch. It would just have been too small. So I sanded them down, and I do that for a couple of reasons. A, I like to scuff this because I'm going to be using epoxy, and you want to sand plywood anyway to get the oxidation off. It has a lot of road grime. It's just a good idea to clean it up. You're really not creating texture or scuff for wood glue. You're just getting rid of the oxidation. So you could even use 120 grit. It doesn't have to be rough. Epoxy, yes, it can be rough to provide scuff. So one of them just got ran one pass on each side. The other one got sanded down thinner to create this 3/8 thickness to correspond with this 3/8 rabbet. Now, as I'm doing that, you can see the grain runs this way, and on this one it's vertical. When I turn it around, whoa, it's horizontal. I've sanded one of the layers of veneer off. And so that will make proper grain orientation when I glue these together. So this one is going this direction, right? And this one will be going vertical. Those get glued together. That's the same width. Now I have a horizontal surface for my veneer to go that direction. And then that should create two thin enough pieces that can make this subtle bend. Yeah? So what I'm doing here is creating some inner ribs or studs out of poplar, and I can utilize these end caps to create that straight edge on one side and the curve on the other. So I can simply align the poplar piece with the straight part of that rebate, clamp it in place. I can mark the curve. Then I can take this over to the bandsaw, cut close to that line, and then utilizing that end cap, we can follow that curve perfectly. I love the process of woodworking, even though I've never made anything like this. You think of these ideas and solutions as you're going. Sometimes they work, sometimes they work well, and sometimes they don't. That's how we learn, yeah? So again, that poplar piece or stud was flushed up with the straight part of the rabbet, and then I pinned it in place with a 23 gauge pin nailer, utilizing a flush trim with a top bearing, routed beautiful and flush to create that perfect curve. All right, let's see how we did. We'll pull this off. And I know that these pins won't hurt a thing being left in these studs. I don't want to just clip them because they're going to be slightly proud, but by grabbing it with a pair of dikes and wiggling it back and forth, it breaks off below the surface. Fantastic. So here I've created a mock-up, just clamped together. This will make more sense now. You can see the two inside studs made of poplar with that same curve, right? This will give some support to the curved plywood. And then that bottom piece is angled. You can see a slight angle there that matches the bottom of that curved piece. Should make it a good clean transition. Everything will be nice and even. Yeah, man. Progress. All right, here's the first one glued up, and it is absolutely important that these get glued up flat. I glue them up at the table saw, and then I move them over to my sliding table, another known flat surface. If you introduce a twist and it dries that way, then you're going to have a corkscrew or a propeller, right? So that was a single piece of 1/2 inch plywood, and now we can do 2 pieces to make the curve. But first, I'll break out the belt sander and just flush up these areas where the stud meets those rails, I guess you'd call them. Just make sure everything is nice and smooth, consistent, flush, all that. And I don't particularly like using a hand plane on dried wood glue. Now, if you've ever done any construction, you know that when you're hanging sheetrock or drywall, you want to mark the stud location on the floor before you start. So that's what I was doing there. And I decided to do these 2 layers in, 2 separate steps. Just thought it'd be easier, less stress, and I can make sure that the first layer is down nice and tight, adding a few staples and some clamping cowls to hold everything in place. And I've shown this before, it's just a habit. I write down the time of the glue up. Years ago, I used to do a lot of solid surface. It takes tons of these clamps, and to this day, I still utilize just about 4 buckets worth for woodworking projects. Blah, dizzy. Running these through the drum sander, getting them nice and flat, or flush I should say, and consistent. I always think it's interesting to see what the heat does to veneer. Heat and moisture. But consistency is what counts. Back at the veneer sled, and it looks like this is before I added that safety feature or the vacuum box. But anyway, here I'm cutting these narrow strips, and I've added blue tape across there because this is cross grain, it's wenge, it's very vulnerable to split apart. But the bottom line is how amazing that cut is, even in cross grain cuts, and I can marry the wenge to the oak. At this stage I have all my panels ready. Flat on one side, curved on the other. This wenge foot starting to happen around the bottom. Got all these veneered pieces ready, and I have to make sure when I put this in the bag that this doesn't shift. And so what I'm going to do is, this is a little bit wild in length, so I cut some little notches here with a router, and I can glue this, put it in place, line this up both sides. I have this auxiliary piece that's going to go, this entire assembly will go in the bag, and I can pin this with a 23 gauge, locking this piece to this piece with the veneer sandwiched in between, and hopefully nothing shifts. So should work. The curved one will be a little trickier, but I have a solution for that. And here you can see that veneer just taped in place, yeah. And I must have lost some footage or skipped something, but anyway, got these out of the vacuum bag. All of them need trimmed. Pretty simple procedure with a router to get that veneer flush. And now, I've shown this quite a bit before, but you can see here, I just mark that substrate with a pencil and utilize a belt sander to get that flush. Just keep an eye on that pencil, and when it disappears, you know you're close. And notice how far that belt sander is overhanging the edge, just past the tipping point. That way the back wheel doesn't dig in. If you don't have a 23 gauge pin nailer, you should get one. They are extremely versatile. Here are these little pins. You can either break them off flush. If they're not in very deep, they pull out easily. That tiny little hole will not show up. If you're ever cutting a bunch of panels and you've laid up a veneer or even formica or whatever, ideally you would hold it back so you don't have to trim that, right? Something like this, just hold it back, and then you go to square them up and you're not having to mess with that overhang. Or if it's just a little bit, you can do something like this. I've used some double stick tape to put that on there, and then this would go over that. Not this piece, it's just a sample for the video. And then you don't have to mess with, trimming that. Now, if it's a bunch of overhang, sure, you want to do that so it doesn't, that vulnerable edge doesn't break. In this situation, I'm using this piece because I've already trimmed these, but there's a little bit of glue hanging out, and my flush bit, router bit has been sharpened so it doesn't quite cut flush. I don't really want to sand this or use a hand plane. I really don't want to use a hand plane because it has glue on it. But I don't want to alter this and get this out of square because that's going to be my reference point. This area here is nice and true. A little bit of glue so I can get past that by adding this dude with some double stick tape. Put that against there, and then I can make my cuts. Here I'm cutting these panels to length, and these are wild. So I want to make this wenge, this foot of this panel, 2 1/4. So what I've done first is I've just trimmed that 2 1/4 just for the first one. And so to make them all the same, rather than marking them, I trimmed this first one at 2 1/4. Then I just found a scrap piece of material. The measurement is arbitrary, and I can put it there, line that up, bring my fence over to it. Now I can do all of them the same way. Once I have all these bottom edges cut and 2 1/4 from the bottom edge to here, then I can set my fence, turn these around, and make these cuts, establishing the height of this panel and keeping everything nice and square. Now, incidentally, you may have noticed that it seems like I'm all over the place, but this is how I work. These videos were shot in this progression. As something is being clamped or drying, I can move on to something else. Here's another one for you. So we've got this established where that's going to cut, right? And I want to back this edge up so this doesn't splinter out, blow out. So I can use a backup, and to really focus that pressure right there, I like using a clamp. tighten that up. Okay. And to focus that pressure, I'll add a spacer right here. This is a piece of plywood, so it kind of bends. And by bringing that out, that focuses all that pressure right where I want it. Because I can't get this clamp right against the blade where I really want to focus that pressure. I need to stay somewhat away to clear the guard. This way, that puts the pressure right there where I want it. That's ready to cut. Now I realize some of you may not have a slider, but these principles, techniques, processes would still apply to, say, a table saw with a crosscut sled, yeah? Here we go. That is exactly what I was after. Wenge is married to the oak all the way around the perimeter. Everything lines up. And here you can see the top construction. Fabulous. All right, that's going to wrap up part 1. Come back and check out part 2, won't you?